what you're doing is real key too. Domity Pongo is here, MTV News correspondent, journalist extraordinaire. You have a conversation that you've been having with Lonnie G. Bunch the third, who
Yeah.
is the curator at the Smithsonian Museum, the African American history piece. He's the 14th secretary of the Smithsonian Institute overall. Uh, Tell me about this 5-part
Yeah.
series that you're doing on MTV. Are you doing it on
Man,
MTV or are you doing it on the
it's actually for
Smithsonian?
the Smithsonian Channel.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Go
yeah,
ahead,
this is
diverse.
actually for the
Go ahead, my
Smithsonian.
diverse brother. Go ahead. When is it?
We spreading it around a little bit. Yeah, so I've been working with the Smithsonian on this 5-part series. The first episode dropped on the 25th. The second episode actually dropped today. It's my pinned tweet on my page right now at Doneti, DONETI_. And I'm talking to Lonnie Bunch about these different moments in history and juxtaposing them against what we're going through right now. And in 1917, July 28th was one of the first, if not the first, recorded civil rights protests in American history. So we talk about that moment, that silent march that the NAACP organized, and then we say that we look at the system that we have right now where the marches aren't so silent, where marches have turned into riots in some cases, where we have the silent march in Brooklyn where black trans people were marching to, raise awareness about black trans lives that have been lost at the hands of police. And so how these, protests have evolved over time. And he and I just go back and forth for an intergenerational dialogue. It's 10-minute episodes. We're going to be doing them now all the way through August. It's just one of the highlights of I don't know, the past few months for me, man.
How did this come about? Because that's really powerful to sit at the feet of somebody. Because one of the things that I'm doing with Greg Carr is, in many ways, kind of a excavation of our history. I think it's super important that we sit with people who have knowledge, because usually that knowledge goes unmined or it's only delivered, like if you're a professor, to your students. But we need
That's
to
right.
have these conversations, and somebody like Lonnie Bunch, who has all of that wealth of knowledge, it's important that the questions are asked, because they just have it. People who just know stuff, they just know stuff. They're not going
Yeah.
around saying, "Oh, come, let me tell you about everything that I know." You have to ask questions, which is why, people get frustrated sometimes because I ask a lot of questions. But that's what journalists do. Our
Right.
job is to get people to unearth the things that they know so that you can know more. You got to respect the craft. And while it may seem like an obvious answer, oh, sure, we all know that. Sometimes it's the subtle questions that you don't know, that one question leads to the next question that will pull out something that neither of you knew was going to come to the forefront. And so it's important. It's important.
I'm so glad you said that, because and I'm not just saying this because I'm talking to you. I was going to tell you this off air. One of the ways I've been using to prepare for this conversation with Lonnie Bunch was by watching your interviews with Dr. Carr on the Saturdays on YouTube. And so I've been like binging those interviews, because what you guys do is y'all allow the spirit to move through the conversation. So, of course, you've got your research. Of course, you know what you're about to talk about. But sometimes when you just let the conversation flow, those little nuggets come out. And when I'm talking to Lonnie Bunch, I want to have all my ducks in a row. I want to remember on this day in July 28th, 1970, this happened. I want to impress him, Then I stopped and said, wait a minute. Let me just ask the real simple questions. I said, you know what? One thing that I think that this generation of activists, some of the activists in my generation lack, is memory. Because our country kind of lacks memory. We forget that a lot of the things we're experiencing now have happened already. And so I just asked a simple question about respectability politics, right? Like, when will we have to stop being a perfect victim for our cases to be taken seriously? We look at George Floyd, we say, oh, he had a criminal record. Trayvon Martin had on a hoodie. And, he took us back to Claudette Colvin, who refused to give up her seat on that bus before Rosa Parks did, but wasn't part of the national conversation because she was a pregnant teen. And, and how these conversations don't happen in the vacuum, or you got, a lot of radical black folks that talk about the LGBT agenda and how, the LGBTQ movement is co-opting some of the black liberation movement. But then she talked about Bayard Rustin and how he was instrumental in putting together the March on Washington, but his name isn't, and he was a gay man, and how his name isn't a part of the conversation because of his lifestyle. And so a lot of these conversations have already been happening. And so I just ask these very simple questions to bring those things to the forefront. It's not buttoned up. I'm in my living room. He's in his, which is because of COVID, but it's just a very comfortable, relaxed conversation, bringing historical context to what it is we're going through.
And actually, the lack of production, I think, gives people permission, because really what we're doing is modeling how we should be having conversations among one another. You have elders in your family that have information that, now's the time to get your family history. Now's the time to get those stories told. And let me tell you, if you have somebody in your family that's 90 years old, they've seen some things. Ask some questions. Ask the really simple. Get them to. I was watching The Chi. I watched The Chi. I hope you watched The Chi, being from Chicago. The Chi on Showtime, Domity.
I love The Chi.
And then this, not to give away too much, but I'm gonna give away a little bit. There's a woman, Ronnie's grandmother, and she goes back to a bar she used to own, and she's having a conversation with the young people, giving them all of the game. Now it's a strip joint. Male strippers in there, but they were able to sit around this woman and let her share, who came in and how they planned and what the things were going on during this era 40 years ago. And it was so beautiful. And I thought what Lena Waithe did with that moment was so powerful, because it's what we need to be doing now. We need to be talking to our elders about the things that they know, because we're history. We're the ones that are going to fill in the blanks. We're the ones that are going to tell our stories, but we can't tell the stories we don't know. So if you have somebody in your family that's an elder, an auntie, a grandfather who's in his 90s, he's seen some things, ask some questions. You got Zoom now, hit record. Doesn't have to be pretty. Doesn't have to be pre-produced. And let's get busy putting together the tapestry of who we are, not through somebody else's lens.